Hi, friends. I hope you're doing well. I thought I'd use this method of responding to all of the wonderful posts and reflections that you have about time use uh, because I'd be repeating myself often throughout the posts, and this is something different than reading yet more text. I don't know that it's better or worse, but it is different. I want to compliment you. I mean, you're really impressed by the way in which you have either taken up or are recognizing the importance of taking up ways of managing and addressing and focusing time and attention. This is a crucial aspect for both efficiency and effectiveness in ministry, but also for health and satisfaction. As indicated, the lack of a product or a regular product makes it difficult sometimes to feel satisfied in ministry because most of us recognize that there's always more that can be done. How do we come to a place where we are at peace with what we have done and the way we have used that precious resource, which is time? So we are people of great freedom. Ours is a profession of great freedom. With a very few exceptions, there's rarely anybody looking over our shoulder wanting to know what we are doing at any given moment. The time that we have is ours to allocate. Certainly, there will be some expectations at the end of a season or a year, but rarely will we get minute questioning about how we do things. Folks want to see that some things get done. And that, of course, freedom brings along with it responsibility. Responsibility to use time faithfully and to determine what using time faithfully means. It involves caring for ourselves and caring for others. It involves doing that which is immediate, but also looking down the road. It involves tasks which demand our attention right now, and sitting back and staring out the window and dreaming with God about what might be happening in this place where we are in ministry. And so all of those are part of responsibility. And we don't always get the balance right, but we keep working at it, and that's what we do. We also struggle because we live in a very much a production oriented society. There are other societies where if thinking and planning and dreaming are far more highly honored than they are in North American society. So we have to make those times. As we've been learning, having goals is really important, goals and priorities. And I would want to say that the greater the lack of goals and priorities in your community of faith, the more important it is that we have them for ourselves. We want to keep helping our communities of faith develop goals and priorities, but we can't let their lack of goals and priorities necessarily get in our way. We can't serve what doesn't exist, their goals and priorities. But their absence of goals and priorities will not change the impact on us if we feel in our souls that we're floundering around. What is it that creates urgency or quadrant one activities for you? And that's going to be different from for all of us. I mean, some people can ignore a ringing telephone quite blithely. I don't care unless I choose to care. Other people are almost like Pavlov's dogs, you know, the experiment when he got them to respond to stimulus. Phone rings, gotta grab it. So, what is it for you that creates those urgencies? And how many of those urgencies are being driven by other people's agendas or lack of preparation? I saw a sign on somebody's desk years ago that I keep wanting to have engraved and hung over my desk. Lack of planning on your part does not necessarily create urgency on my part. And it's true. We have to own those things to which we respond. I'm a believer in deadlines set well in advance of the actual due date. I've been that way throughout university as well. I'm one of the people who does not work well at times of extreme pressure. I tend to freeze up. But I know that about myself. Maybe you're wired differently. How can you put together your natural proclivities and your and the work that you do? If you are somebody who is pressure averse, then schedule your time in such a way. Speaking of scheduling your time, I strongly recommend that you only have one calendar in which you include everything: your personal, your family, as well as your professional uh, activities. Having more than one calendar can make a whole lot of confusion for you and for anyone who you work with. You only have to miss a few things you promise your family to do to realize, not working. So, one calendar. How does your personal rhythm of work function? For some people, it's really important, or it works better anyway, to get into a task and stay in a task. So, for instance, the traditional model of sermon writing is a block of time every day. I tried that for the first few years of ministry and discovered that it really didn't work because I felt like I was wasting a whole lot of time getting back into the process. So I blocked out an entire day. I just blocked out an entire day. I didn't answer the phone. It really wouldn't have to be a funeral to get me to rearrange that day because that worked for me. I also wanted to make sure that that day of sermon writing was early enough in the week so that the ideas could continue to percolate because I recognize that even when I'm not working on something directly, it's still going around in my head. That's also tied into a whole thing around sermon preparation, which would usually have me doing the exegesis work for a sermon anywhere from 6 to 8 weeks in advance of when it was being preached, which is a whole nother question that we can talk about sometime if you want to. But using your time, blocking your time, how do you use your time in the way that is most productive for your ways of functioning? I believe in efficiency and organization for myself. The way I talk about it with myself is that if I'm organized and ready, then it lets other people's stuff go off the rails without throwing me into a panic. But that's just the way I am. I probably should have a confessional about being a recovering control freak or something. But you see what I'm saying? That it's really important to be part of the equation. Do you get thrown when things start to go a little bit shaky? In that case, for your own well being and your own good health, you need to think about ways of establishing some greater degree of control. Recognizing that in dealing in a volunteer organization, in the service of humanity, there will always be multiple things that are outside our control. So if efficiency and effectiveness and being in control are important, you really do need to identify those things that you can control. I believe in time logs. I also believe in long term time logs. What I mean by that is that at different times of the church year, our use of time will change. For instance, during Advent and Lent and Easter, for example, we're doing a whole lot more service preparation and delivering of worship services. I used to do a lot of my non emergency pastoral visiting during the summer months when there were fewer demands, fewer meetings, less uh, fewer bells and whistles for the services. But I would need, of course, to have that reflected over the long haul. I also believe in working in percentages, uh, doing the mathematical equation that switches time raw hours into a percentage of time use. I find that much more revealing about whether or not I've actually been living into my identified priorities over a span of time. There was a comment, there was an interesting conversation in one person's reflections about um, time off and returning to the congregation for particular events. I can honestly say that I never returned to a congregation when I was on study leave or vacation for a funeral. That's in 40 years of ministry. I, I didn't. I made sure that there were other people covering. I made sure that it was well known that people were covering, and I made it clear that if a family wanted to delay the funeral until after I returned, I would be glad to do that. My rationale was that, first of all, if I start doing it for one person, I need to start doing it for others. Otherwise, I am creating a really unhealthy dichotomy in the congregation. The second thing is that I don't want ministry to be dependent on me. Yes, I am the pastor of this congregation, but I am not the sole person who can minister to them in the grace of Christ. So, what did that make people unhappy sometimes? Yes. Was I ever threatened? No. But I can see how it would. I also had an experience fairly early on in ministry of two colleagues who flamed out really quite tragically. And in both cases, they had not taken a full vacation or a full study leave in a number of years. They had come to see themselves as being indispensable and eventually burned out, and that was expressed in ways that were highly inappropriate and extremely damaging to their congregation. Word to the wise, you are not indispensable, and those times that you have for yourself and for your family and your development, they are as much part of your work as any of the pastoral work you might do. For some of you, and I'm glad to see you are getting aware of this, if you are highly respondent to outside stimuli, then you need to control that during work time. So, for instance, putting in your calendar a couple of times during the day to respond to emails or texts and turning off those functions, those applications on your computer may be a way of dealing with that. If you know, you see the icon flash that you have a new email and that draws you away, then you need to find ways to address that. The studies suggest that it may require up to 20 minutes for us to get back on task if we've been drawn away like that. 20 minutes. It may not feel like that, but it may. That's what the psychological experiments show, that it may take up to 20 minutes to get back on task. And so if we're constantly being interrupted, then we need to find a way of controlling that interruption. Note about email. A couple of you noted that your email was also the church email. I strongly, strongly suggest that you have both an independent private email and a private phone number. You have to make those sorts of separations. I also believe that if you are a social media type, you need to have a separate Facebook account and Twitter account and whatever all else those accounts are. You need to have a life, and your church is not your life. Your church is a gift and a task, but it needs to be separate from you, both for their good and for your own good. Those are some of the things that I took from that wonderful discussion that you had. I hope you found it useful, and I hope that as time goes on, you'll find those skills and tools and suggestions about time use and living with the gift of time that we have in the most creative way possible. I hope you'll find those increasingly useful.